Welcome to Wolfe Street.
Like, subscribe, and stay on Wolfe Street.
Tell me, which part of the world are you watching from?
Chapter 1. The cold light the trouble began in the library of Amos Kettering, a wealthy collector whose enemies were almost as numerous as his locked cabinets. He was found dead beside his writing desk, while the green-shaded study lamp burned brightly above him. Yet when I touched the bulb, it was cold enough to have spent the night in a snowbank. That was at 9:20 on a grey Tuesday morning in November, in a mansion on East 68th Street that had enough stone lions, iron gates, and polished brass to make an honest man feel underdressed. I had been admitted by a butler named Edwin Sykes, a long, narrow specimen with silver hair, and the expression of a man who had spent 30 years learning not to hear family quarrels. He had telephoned Nero Wolfe at 8:43. Mr. Wolfe was in the plant rooms at the time, which meant that murder, flood, and invasion all had to wait until 10 o'clock, unless Fritz Brenner or I could prove that the brownstone was on fire. Sykes had managed to interest me by mentioning a fee of $10,000 and a dead millionaire. The combination was not irresistible, but it was worth putting on a coat. I had arrived before the police, because Sykes had called Wolfe before calling them. That decision would later cause Inspector Kramer to increase the pressure in his arteries. Amos Kettering was seated on the floor with his back against the side of the desk. He was 62, broad through the shoulders, bald except for a white fringe, and dressed in a dark blue smoking jacket over striped pajamas. His head leaned slightly to the right. There was a bruise at his temple, but it was too small to account for his condition. Near his left hand lay a broken porcelain cup and a brown stain that had spread across the carpet. The library was large enough to house a small public school and better furnished than most banks. Books climbed from floor to ceiling behind glass doors. 3 display cabinets stood against the far wall, each holding rare manuscripts, jeweled bindings, and other things that people buy after they have acquired more money than hobbies. Heavy curtains covered 2 windows facing the street. A coal fire had burned low in the marble fireplace. The lamp was the lively item. Its green shade threw a circle of light over the blotter, a silver letter opener, 3 sealed envelopes, and an open catalogue from an auction house. The bulb beneath it shone steadily. I had reached under the shade because the sight of Kettering's body, the broken cup, and the blazing lamp suggested that he had been working late. The bulb was cold. I tried it again, using 2 fingers. There was no mistake. A bulb that had been burning for hours should have objected to being handled. This one might have come from a refrigerator. I bent to inspect it. The glass looked ordinary. The filament glowed. The shade was warm near the top, but not as warm as it should have been. I switched the lamp off. The light vanished. I switched it on. It returned immediately. Behind me, Sykes cleared his throat. "Should you be touching things, Mr. Goodwin?" "I should be home eating breakfast. Since neither of us arranged that, we will have to cope." He looked at Kettering without moving his head. "Is he dead?" "He is not resting. I thought perhaps a doctor should determine it." "He will. Meanwhile, tell me who found him." "I did, at 8:35. Door locked. It was closed but not locked. Windows, fastened from within." "Who was in the house overnight?" Sykes hesitated, which was natural. In a house like that, the family list was never merely a list. It was ammunition. Mr. Kettering's nephew, Mr. Harold Kettering. Miss Celia Kettering, his daughter, Mr. Simon Vale, his business partner, Miss Ruth Calder, his private secretary, Miss Rowan Bell, who is cataloguing the collection, and myself, Mrs. Sykes, 2 maids, and the cook, guests. Mr. Vale and Miss Bell reside here temporarily. There were no other overnight guests. You can say who claims to have seen him last. His lips tightened by half an inch. Mr. Vale brought him correspondence at 11:15. What time did Kettering usually get up? 7:30, breakfast at 8. When he did not appear, I came here. Did he lock the library at night? Sometimes, not always. Was the lamp burning when you entered? Yes. Was the fire like that? He glanced at the fireplace. Lauer, I believe. I added coal before telephoning. I stared at him. You altered the room. It was cold. That was the first time I understood why Amos Kettering had employed Sykes for 30 years. Anyone who could stand 3 feet from a corpse and improve the fire had the right temperament for domestic service. I crossed to the windows. Both latches were down. There was dust along the inside sill except near the right corner, where a clean oval showed that something had rested there recently. On a small table beneath the window sat a bronze figure of a seated owl. It was heavy enough to dent a skull and ugly enough to justify suspicion. Was anything usually kept on the sill? Sykes followed my glance. A small brass clock. Where is it? I do not know. Did it work? It was temperamental. So was Nero Wolfe, but we generally knew where he was. The front bell rang before Sykes could answer. A moment later, the house filled with the purposeful sound of official shoes. Inspector Kramer entered the library with Sergeant Stebbins and 2 men from the homicide squad. Kramer saw me, stopped, and gave his cigar an accusing look, as though I had been hiding in the tobacco. Goodwin, good morning. What are you doing here? Admiring the lighting. He turned to Sykes. Who called him? I did, Inspector. Why? To engage Mr. Wolfe. Kramer's face developed weather. You had a dead man in the house and called Wolfe before the police. Sykes considered it. Yes. Kramer looked at me. You touch anything. The lamp switch, the bulb, and the floor with my shoes. Sykes added coal to the fire. Apart from that, the room is waiting for science. He moved toward the body, then stopped. The bulb. It is cold, cold. Like you're welcome. He reached under the shade, touched it, and frowned. Then he switched the lamp off and on. Could be a low-heat bulb. It could also be moonlight in a glass bottle, but I doubt it. Stebbins crouched beside Kettering while one of the squad men began photographing the room. Kramer inspected the desk. The 3 envelopes were addressed in Kettering's hand. 1 to Harold Kettering, 1 to Celia Kettering, and 1 to Simon Vale. Family conference by mail, I said. Keep your hands off. They have been off for nearly a minute. The medical examiner arrived at 9:45. He was Dr. Vollmer's opposite in every physical respect, being short, round, and quick, with bright eyes behind rimless glasses. After examining the body and the stain on the carpet, he sniffed the broken cup. Coffee, he said. Possibly something else. We will know after analysis. What killed him? Kramer asked. Too early. There is minor trauma at the right temple. It may be from falling against the desk. Rigor suggests death between 11:30 and 2. Poison. Possible. Kramer looked at Sykes, who brought him coffee. Miss Calder, at approximately 11. A voice came from the doorway. That is not true. The woman standing there was 34, with dark hair pulled firmly back and grey eyes that were not inclined to retreat. She wore a plain dark dress and carried herself with the controlled efficiency of a private secretary. Sykes turned. Miss Calder, you did bring the tray. I carried it from the kitchen. Mr. Vale took it into the library. A second figure appeared behind her, a broad, controlled man of 51, whose dark suit fitted him too well to be accidental. That is a distinction without importance, he said. It may be important to the police, Ruth Calder replied. Kramer took charge. Names. The man inclined his head. Simon Vale, Mr. Kettering's business partner. You took the coffee in? Yes, at 11:05. You saw him drink it. I placed the tray on the desk and left. Was the lamp on? Vale's eyes moved toward it. I believe so. You believe? I was concerned with the letters he dictated, Ruth Calder said. The lamp was not on when I left the tray outside. Val turned sharply. You could not see into the room from the passage. The door was open. Then your angle was poor. That exchange was worth saving. I put it in the cabinet where I keep things that might later become facts. Kramer began separating them for questioning. Before he could get far, a young woman came down the corridor at speed. She had auburn hair, a cream-colored sweater, and the expression of someone who had already cried and was furious about it. "Is my father dead?" No one answered quickly enough. She looked at the body and gripped the door frame. Behind her came a man in his late 20s, tall, handsome, and untidy in a deliberate way. He put a hand on her arm. "Celia, come away." She shook him off. "Who did this?" Kramer asked her name, though he knew it. "Celia Kettering." The young man supplied his own. "Harold Kettering. Amos was my uncle." Kramer's eyes went to the envelopes on the desk. Celia followed the look and saw her name written on one of them. "That letter is mine. It is evidence," Kramer said. "My father wrote it to me. That makes it evidence with your name on it." Harold stepped closer to the desk, but Stebbins blocked him. The move was casual enough, but Harold's face changed. Not much, only enough. Then Celia saw the broken cup. He never drank coffee at night. Every head in the room turned toward her. Vale spoke first. "He did last night. He hated it after dinner. He said it disturbed his sleep." Ruth Calder looked at Vale. "You told me he had asked for it." "He had." Celia's voice sharpened. "Then he was not asking for himself." The room became still except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere beyond the library. Not the missing brass clock, naturally. That would have been too convenient. Kramer began firing questions, but I was no longer listening with both ears. I was looking at the lamp. The light was steady and green. The shade covered most of the bulb, but from where I stood I could see the bright curve of glass beneath it. I crossed the room, keeping my hands in my pockets, and lowered my head. The bulb was not glowing. Something inside the shade was. A thin disk of light, flat as a coin, had been fitted beneath the bulb socket. It threw its beam downward and made the bulb appear illuminated. The bulb itself was dark. Kramer saw my posture. "What now?" "Get a technician before anyone touches it." He came beside me, bent, and swore with feeling. The green-shaded lamp was burning brightly, but the bulb had never been lit. At 10:17 I telephoned the brownstone. Fritz answered. "Mr. Wolfe is still with the orchids, Archie. Tell him we have a dead collector." A cup of coffee, nobody ordered. A missing clock, 3 sealed letters, and a lamp designed to lie. There was a pause. "Shall I mention the fee?" "Mention $10,000. Another pause. Shorter this time. I will tell him at once. Chapter 2. A wire without a purpose. Inspector Kramer arrived with his usual supply of suspicion, though technically he had never left. He merely went into the hall to telephone headquarters, returned with a fresh cigar, and entered the library as if he had just come through the front door at the head of an invading army. By then a police electrician named Murphy was kneeling beside the green-shaded lamp. He had removed neither the bulb nor the luminous disc concealed beneath it, because Kramer had ordered photographs from every angle first. Murphy was a broad man with square fingers, an ancient leather toolcase, and the wounded dignity of an expert forced to wait while cameras admired his work. Kramer planted himself beside the desk and pointed his cigar at the lamp. The bulb was replaced. I was standing near the fireplace, making notes in my pocket notebook. By whom? That is what we are going to find out. When? After Kettering was killed. Why? To alter the apparent time of death. I put the notebook away. That would be a promising theory if the bulb had anything to do with the apparent time of death. It was found burning. The bulb was found pretending to burn. You know what I mean. I do, but the murderer may not. Kramer glared at the lamp. Summoner removed the hot bulb screwed in a cold one and installed that gadget to make it appear lighted. Murphy looked up. Not after the killing, Inspector. Kramer's head turned. Why not? Because this disc was fitted into the socket assembly before the bulb went in. It is held by a threaded collar. You would need to dismantle the lamp head to install it. How long? With tools. 5 minutes, maybe 10 if you were worried about being caught. Kramer looked at the room, the body, the open door, and the 6 people who had gathered in the passage despite repeated instructions to remain elsewhere. Plenty of time. Murphy shrugged. Maybe, but the wiring for the disc is not in the lamp cord. It runs through the stem separately. Kramer's cigar stopped halfway to his mouth. I left the fireplace. The lamp stood on the rear corner of Kettering's desk. It was a solid brass affair, with a green glass shade, the kind bankers used when bankers still wore watch chains and expected customers to whisper. A black electrical cord descended from its base and disappeared behind the desk. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about it, except that the nearest wall outlet was 3 feet to the left. Murphy shifted his knees and pointed under the desk. "See that?" I crouched beside him. The cord did not turn toward the outlet. Instead, it ran straight back to the paneled wall and entered a narrow hole less than half an inch above the floor. Kramer bent over us. "Where does it go?" "That is the question," Murphy said. "You are the electrician, and the wall is the wall." The paneling was dark walnut, polished and thick. The hole had been drilled cleanly and fitted with a small brass ring, so the arrangement was not recent and not improvised. There were no scratches, splinters, or loose plaster. Whoever had sent the cord through the wall had meant it to remain there. I ran a finger near the opening without touching the wire. "Old work," Murphy nodded. "Months old at least, possibly years." Kramer straightened. "The lamp is wired into another room." "Could be. What is behind that wall?" Sykes, who had been standing in the doorway with the patience of a monument, answered. "The east passage and the lower stair." Then we opened the panel. Sykes's eyes moved to the woodwork. Mr. Kettering would have objected. Kramer gave him a look. "He may file a complaint." Sykes accepted that. While Murphy went to the passage to examine the opposite side, I inspected the lamp more closely. The ordinary bulb was 40 watts. It had no maker's mark visible from below, but the glass was clear and the filament intact. Beneath it, concealed by the metal rim of the shade, was the flat light source Murphy had described. It was no thicker than 2 stacked coins, with a ring of tiny white points enclosed behind frosted glass. "A custom job?" I asked. "Looks like it," Murphy said from the doorway. "Low voltage, might be used in display cases or instrument panels. Hot enough to warm the shade. After a while, a little not enough to heat the bulb above it." That accounted for the cold glass and the faint warmth I had noticed in the shade. It did not account for why anyone had gone to the trouble. Kramer returned to his theory. The killer prepared the lamp beforehand, then after Kettering died, he turned on the hidden light and replaced the bulb with a cold one. I said, "You have fallen in love with replacing the bulb. It explains the cold bulb. The bulb was cold because it was not lit. He replaced it anyway." "Why?" "To make us think the lamp had been on longer than it had. That would make us think the bulb should be hot." Kramer removed the cigar from his mouth and inspected the wet end as if it had betrayed him. "Then to make us think it had just been turned on." The body was found at 8:35. A cold bulb would suggest it had just been turned on, but the shade was warm, which suggests the hidden disk had been burning. That gives us 2 clocks, neither of which tells time. I am aware of that. I hoped so. He took 1 step toward me. "Goodwin, I have a dead man. Poison is possible. A secret electrical device is certain, and 6 people in this house are lying. I do not need your help making it confusing. You have never needed help with that." Stebbins coughed into his fist. "It may have been bronchial," Murphy called from the passage. "Inspector." We joined him outside the library. The east passage was narrower than the main hall and had no windows. A staircase descended to the service floor at one end. On the wall opposite the library stood a tall mahogany cabinet containing maps rolled in pigeonholes. Murphy had pulled it away from the paneling with assistance from a patrolman. Behind it, the cord emerged from another brass-ringed hole. It continued down the wall, hidden by the cabinet, and entered a small black box fastened near the baseboard. Kramer crouched. "A transformer," Murphy shook his head. "Control relay." "What does it control?" "The hidden light, probably." The box had no switch on its face. 2 insulated wires left its lower edge and passed beneath the baseboard toward the staircase. A 3rd wire returned through the wall to the lamp. I said, So the lamp cord is not the lamp cord. Part of it may feed the ordinary bulb, Murphy said. The extra conductors operate the disc. Kramer pointed downstairs. Follow them. That required removing a narrow strip of molding, which made Sykes look more distressed than the corpse had. The wires descended beside the service stairs and vanished through the ceiling of the basement corridor. We followed them past the wine room, the furnace room, and a locked steel door that Sykes identified as storage for valuable packing cases. At the far end was a small room containing the house telephone exchange, electrical panels, and a workbench. The wires entered through the ceiling and terminated inside a second black box mounted beneath the telephone board. This box had a switch. It was small and brass, like the toggle on an old wireless set. Above it, someone had fixed a white enamel label bearing a single typed word. Library. Kramer looked at Sykes. Who uses this room? The household electrician when required. Mr. Vale occasionally. Mr. Kettering had a key. The door was unlocked. It usually is. Who knew about the switch? Sykes stared at it. I did not. Kramer's attention sharpened. You have been in this house 30 years. 32. And you did not know there was a switch in the basement controlling a lamp in the library? I did not. Murphy opened the box. It does not control the lamp, only the disc inside it. He tested the connections with a meter, then pressed the switch upward. Someone upstairs tell us what happens. Stebbins went to the library while we waited. His voice came through a wall telephone a minute later. The false light went out. Murphy pressed the switch down. Stebbins reported that it came on again. Kramer turned to Sykes, who was in the basement last night, the cook until approximately 9 Mrs. Sykes inspected the stores at 9:30. The furnace is automatic. I came down shortly before 11 to select wine for today's luncheon. Anyone else? I cannot say. Could anyone enter from outside? There is a service door at the rear. Locked. At night. Who has keys? Myself, Mrs. Sykes, Mr. Kettering, Miss Kettering, and Mr. Vale. I looked at the switch. It was clean. The surrounding box was dusty, but the brass toggle had been handled enough to keep it bright. When was the false light switched on? I asked Murphy. He considered. Cannot tell from the equipment. The disc has no timer. Could it remain on for hours? Days. Could the ordinary bulb and the disc be on together? Yes, separate circuits. That was interesting enough to deserve a place in the notebook. Kramer asked Sykes to fetch Simon Vale. While we waited, I examined the workbench. It held coils of wire, fuses, screwdrivers, solder, 2 burned out bulbs, and several cardboard cartons. Dust lay evenly over most of it. One clear rectangle near the edge showed where a small object had recently been removed. What stood there? I asked. Sykes leaned closer. Do you use the bench? Rarely. Val arrived with Rowan Bell behind him. Kramer told her to leave. She folded her arms. I found the auction catalogue in the passage. If this concerns Mr. Kettering's movements, I may know something useful. Kramer regarded her. Stand against the wall and save it until I ask. She complied. But only geographically. Vale looked at the exposed box. What is that? Kramer watched him. You tell me. I have never seen it. You use this room. I use the telephone board when the house lines fail. That occurs regularly. Did you know a switch down here operated the library lamp? Val glanced at Murphy. Does it? The hidden light beneath the bulb. For the first time since I had met him, Vale lost control of his face. His lips parted, and his eyes flicked toward Rowan Bell before returning to Kramer. Hidden light. Kramer moved closer. You said the lamp was on when you took Kettering his coffee. I said I believed it was. The bulb was cold. Then I was mistaken. The lamp appeared to be burning because a concealed disc was switched on from this basement. I know nothing about it. You have a key to the rear entrance. So does Miss Kettering. You were the last known person to see Kettering alive. That has not been established. It has by you. Val's jaw tightened. I delivered coffee and correspondence at 11:05. He was alive. He dictated 3 short letters. I left at 11:20. The medical examiner places death sometime after 11:30. Then someone saw him after I did. Who? I cannot know. Rowan Bell spoke from the wall. I may have. Kramer swung toward her. You may have what? Seen Mr. Kettering after Mr. Vale left. Vale turned. You told me you went upstairs. I did. Then I came down again. What time? Kramer demanded. About 11:40. Why? To return a catalogue. The auction catalogue on his desk. Yes. What happened? The library door was closed. I saw light beneath it, so I assumed he was working. I did not knock. You did not see him. I saw his shadow. The basement room became quiet, Kramer said. Where? On the glass panel above the library door, the light inside cast his shadow upward. He was standing near the desk. I pictured the door. It was solid walnut to a height of 6 feet, with a narrow rectangle of pebbled glass above it. A bright lamp inside could throw a moving form against the glass. You are certain it was Kettering? I asked. Rowan's grey eyes came to me. It had his shape, broad shoulders, bald head. Did the shadow move? Yes. It bent over the desk. What happened to the catalogue? I left it on a table in the passage. It was on the desk this morning. She looked at Vale. Vale's voice was cold. Do not look at me, Kramer asked. Who moved it? Neither answered. I went upstairs with Murphy while Kramer continued applying pressure in the basement. We returned to the library and closed the door. The false light still burned beneath the shade. I stepped into the passage and looked up at the pebbled glass panel. Nothing appeared on it. I went back inside and stood beside the desk. Murphy watched. Try moving, he said. I moved. Stebbins reported from the passage that he could see only a faint blur. Murphy switched on the ordinary bulb as well. The 2 lights together made the green shade brighter, but my shadow remained indistinct. Not enough light, he said. I looked around the room. The ceiling fixture was off. The fireplace was low. Heavy curtains sealed the windows. If Rowan Bell had seen a sharp shadow, another light source had been involved. Then I noticed the bronze owl on the table beneath the window. Its polished eyes were glass. I crossed to it. The figure stood about 10 inches high, fat and solemn, with its head turned toward the desk. The missing brass clock had supposedly occupied the windowsill nearby. I lifted the owl with a handkerchief and examined its base. A wire had once entered through a small opening in the rear. Murphy took it, removed 2 screws, and lifted the base plate. Inside was an empty compartment shaped for a battery and a narrow cylindrical socket aimed through the owl's right eye. A projector, he said. For what? He held it toward the lamp. Possibly a beam, possibly an image. The left glass eye was decorative. Behind the right eye, the internal tube pointed directly toward the upper door panel. Kramer came in as Murphy was testing it. What now? I told him. He looked from the owl to the door. Someone used that thing to cast Kettering's shadow. Not necessarily Kettering's. Rowan Bell had followed him upstairs despite orders, or because of them. She stood at the library entrance, staring at the owl. I saw a man's shadow, she said. You saw the outline of one, I corrected. A broad body, a bald head bending over a desk. Her face had gone pale. It moved. Then the projector may have held a moving strip or rotating stencil. Murphy nodded slowly. Possible. A simple mechanism could do it. Kramer took the owl from him. Where is the mechanism now? We're moved. And the battery? We're moved. Kramer looked toward the windowsill. The missing clock. That was the first useful thing he had said all morning without assistance. A small clock could contain a spring motor. It could also conceal a film strip, stencil wheel, or timing device. If it had been attached to the owl, It might have produced the moving silhouette Rowan claimed to have seen. Removing the clock afterward would remove the mechanism and the timer together. Kramer turned to Sykes. When did you last see the brass clock? Yesterday afternoon. Who was in the library? Nearly everyone at some point. That answer pleased nobody. The photographer finished with the lamp, and Murphy began dismantling it. He unscrewed the bulb, removed the collar, and lifted out the luminous disc. 2 fine wires ran down through a hollow channel hidden inside the brass stem. Beneath the desk, he separated the outer covering from the cord. There, he said. Inside what appeared to be one cord were 2 independent systems. One pair of wires went to the wall outlet through an ordinary concealed junction. The second pair went through the wall, along the passage, and down to the basement switch. The regular bulb could be controlled here at the desk, Murphy said. The false light could be controlled only from downstairs. Kramer's brow folded. Unless there is another switch. Murphy tested the line. There is not. I studied the hole in the wall, the double wiring, the hidden disc, and the bronze owl. None of it had been assembled during a hurried murder. It was too elaborate, too permanent, and too carefully concealed. The device had been built for repeated use. That was the part Kramer had missed because he was still trying to force a fresh crime into an old room. The murderer did not install this last night, I said. Kramer grunted. We know that. We know more. Kettering installed it, or allowed it to be installed. Why would he? To make the lamp appear lit when it was not. I had reached that point. Then take another step. A false light controlled from the basement, a projector aimed at the door glass, and a mechanism hidden in a clock. This was not built to conceal a murder. It was built to create an alibi. Kramer stared at me. For Kettering? He asked. That depends on whose shadow the owl was trained to make. I crossed to the desk and looked at the 3 sealed envelopes. Kettering had dictated them shortly before his death, according to Vale. Celia said he never drank coffee at night. Rowan had seen a shadow at 11:40, but not the man himself. The lamp had lied about burning. The owl had probably lied about movement. The room was full of objects performing duties they had not been designed for. A lamp gave light without using its bulb. A clock had vanished without leaving time behind. An owl watched a door instead of a mouse. A cup of coffee had been delivered to a man who did not want it. Kramer followed my gaze to the envelopes. You think those letters matter? I think everything Kettering arranged before he died matters. Then open them. They are sealed, I noticed. He called for the evidence man. The envelopes were photographed, numbered, and opened under Kramer's supervision. The first, addressed to Harold, contained 1 sentence. You will receive my final decision tomorrow morning. The second, addressed to Celia, contained another. What you asked of me is impossible, but I shall explain at breakfast. The third, addressed to Simon Vale, was shorter. Remain in the house tonight and speak to no one. All 3 were signed Amos Kettering. Kramer read them twice. I looked at Vale. Did he dictate those exact words? Yes. Did he explain them? He never explained anything he could postpone. Why were they sealed if the recipients were in the house? He said they were to be delivered at breakfast. By whom? By Sykes. Sykes inclined his head. That was the instruction. Kramer held up Vale's letter. Remain in the house tonight. Why? I do not know. Did you obey? Yes. Did you speak to anyone? Vale's eyes shifted briefly toward Rowan Bell. That depends on what is meant by speak. I returned to the lamp. Murphy had laid its parts on a white cloth. The cold bulb rested beside the hidden disc. I picked up neither. There was no need. The bulb had never been intended to establish the time of Kettering's death. The secret light had never been intended to illuminate the library. It illuminated only the desk and the lower edge of the door panel, enough to support an illusion when combined with the owl projector. The wire through the wall seemed to have no sensible purpose, because we had assumed it belonged to a lamp. It belonged to a performance. At 12:10, I phoned Wolfe again. This time he had descended from the plant rooms and was in the office seated behind his desk with beer and the morning mail. His voice informed me that I had interrupted a letter concerning black spot on cattleya leaves. The situation has improved, I told him. For the murderer, possibly. The false light is operated from a basement switch. A bronze owl appears to have projected a moving silhouette onto the glass above the library door. The mechanism may have been hidden in the missing clock. 3 letters were dictated before Kettering died, each promising action in the morning. One ordered his business partner to remain in the house and speak to no one. Wolfe was silent for 4 seconds. Who saw the silhouette? Rowan Bell, the cataloguer. Did she see the lamp? Only light beneath the door and the shadow above it. Then she saw what she was intended to see. That was my conclusion. It was your suspicion. Conclusions require facts. I am collecting them. Collect the clock. It is missing. Then collect the person who removed it. I will put that on my list. What does Mr. Kramer believe? That the bulb was replaced after the murder. A sound came over the line that might have been Wolfe shifting his weight or civilization settling. Archie. Yes. A man who replaces a bulb to prove it has been burning does not understand bulbs. A man who constructs a false lamp understands them very well. Determine who designed the apparatus. You are taking the case. I have not been offered it. Sykes offered 10,000. A servant cannot bind an estate. I will find someone with a checkbook. Do so, and bring me the 3 letters or exact copies. Kramer may object. He often does. The connection ended. I put the telephone down and returned to the library. Kramer was standing beneath the glass panel, looking from the owl to the lamp. He had finally stopped accusing the bulb and begun accusing the room. That was progress, though I did not mention it. On the desk, beneath the place where the false green light had shone, the auction catalogue lay open to a photograph of a medieval manuscript called the Book of Hours of St. Aldwyn. A red pencil mark circled its estimated price. In the margin, Amos Kettering had written 5 words. The light proves nothing at all. Chapter 3. The 3 visitors by the time I got back to West 35th Street. The rain had thickened from a nuisance into a policy. New York had gone grey from the rooftops down, and the taxis on 10th Avenue moved through shining streets like yellow beetles with bad tempers. Fritz admitted me, took my wet coat, and informed me that Wolfe had eaten lunch without complaint, which meant either the shad roe had been exceptional or the Kettering case had begun to interest him. With Wolfe, appetite and intellect occupied neighboring departments and frequently sent each other memoranda. I found him in the office behind his desk, leaning back in the oversized chair that had been built to accommodate both his body and his opinion of himself. A bottle of beer stood at his right hand. 3 sheets of paper lay before him, each covered with my typed notes. The office was warm, quiet, and safe from everything except Wolfe's questions. He looked at me. You are late. I had to persuade Kramer that copies of the letters would not bring down the government. Did you? I persuaded Sergeant Stebbins to persuade the copying machine. I placed the 3 copies on his desk and sat in the red leather chair. Wolfe glanced at them. You reported that only 3 persons entered the library after dinner. That is what the corrected household record shows. The household record was now clear. Rowan Bell was cataloguing the collection under contract, while Ruth Calder handled Kettering's personal correspondence and appointments. The 3 people who could be proved to have entered the library between 10 and midnight were Harold Kettering, Amos's nephew and expected heir, Ruth Calder, his private secretary, and Simon Vale, his business partner. Every other appearance in the passage had been observed from outside the room. Wolfe lifted one of the copies. Begin with Harold. 20. 8 tall, polished, and broke in a manner that requires expensive shoes. He entered at 10:12. He says Amos had summoned him to discuss a trust fund. He remained 9 minutes. The lamp, already glowing when he went in. The ordinary bulb or the concealed light? He could not say. He saw a green pool on the desk and assumed the lamp was on. What did Kettering say? That Harold's debts had become intolerable and that he intended to alter his will. Convenient. For Harold. For us, a motive delivered in a box. He denies killing him. Most murderers do. It saves time. I gave Wolfe the rest. Harold had left the library angry enough for Sykes to hear the door strike the frame. He went upstairs, telephoned a woman named Laura Dane, and remained in his room until midnight, according to Harold. According to the housemaid, he came downstairs once at 11:30, though she saw only his back. Wolfe put down the page. Ruth Calder. 34. Efficient, calm, and dressed as though color had been forbidden by office rule. She entered at 10:40. She brought Kettering 2 letters for signature and a memorandum concerning the auction catalogue. She stayed approximately 15 minutes. The lamp. She insists Kettering never used it. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. Never. Her word. She says he disliked the green shade because it distorted the color of paper and made red ink appear brown. He preferred the ceiling lights or the wall lamps. Yet the apparatus was built into his desk lamp. That did not trouble her. It should have. It troubled Kramer. He asked whether she knew about the hidden disc. She said she had never seen it. What occurred during her visit? Kettering signed one letter, refused the other, and dictated a note to Simon Vale. Ruth says he was alive, irritable, and drinking mineral water. Coffee? None. Did she see the cup later found broken? She says it was not there. Wolfe tapped one finger against the desk. Simon Vale. 51, broad, smooth, and controlled. He owns half of Kettering and Vale Imports, which deals in rare books, private collections, and objects with prices that improve when ordinary people cannot understand them. He entered at 11:05 and says he left at 11:22. The lamp. He says Kettering hated dark rooms and always used it at night. Wolfe closed his eyes. I waited. When Wolfe closes his eyes during a report, he may be thinking or merely protecting himself from the sight of human inconsistency. After several seconds, he opened them again. Recite the 3 statements exactly. I consulted my notebook, Harold said. The lamp was glowing when I entered. Ruth said, Mr. Kettering never used that lamp. Simon said, Amos hated a dark room and always had the lamp on after sunset. Wolfe reached for his beer and poured. They fit together, I said. He raised his brows. Harold supplies the light. Ruth supplies the habit against it. Simon supplies the habit for it. Between them, they make the lamp important without agreeing on what it means. Wolfe drank, wiped his lips, and set the glass down. Their statements fit too neatly. That was my thought. It was not. It was approaching my thought. Archie, 3 witnesses who contradict one another may be independent. 3 witnesses whose contradictions form a complete explanation are often cooperating. That sounds useful enough to embroider. It is merely experience. He picked up Harold's statement. The nephew saw the effect but not the source. The secretary denies the habit. The partner asserts the opposite habit. Each statement directs attention to the lamp. Why? To make Kramer chase the cold bulb? Perhaps. Or to ensure somebody notices the false light? Perhaps. That gives us 2 perhapses. Then earn a fact. The doorbell rang. A minute later, Fritz appeared. Mr. Kramer. Wolfe sighed. Admit him. Kramer entered carrying his hat and irritation. His overcoat was wet, his face was red, and his cigar had gone out. He dropped into the yellow chair without being invited. You have been meddling. Wolfe looked at him. You came here to report your progress. I came here to find out why Goodwin has been questioning witnesses after I told him to stay out of the house. I was invited, I said. By whom? Celia Kettering. She signed Wolfe's retainer at 2:15. That was true. After Amos's death, Celia had decided that $10,000 was a reasonable price for discovering whether her father's killer intended to inherit from him. Kramer turned to Wolfe. You are working for the daughter. I am working for the estate through Miss Kettering's temporary authority. You do not have authority to obstruct a homicide investigation. I seldom obstruct. I redirect. Kramer leaned forward. Then redirect this. The medical examiner found aconitine in the coffee residue and in Kettering's stomach. That improved the room. Aconitine, Wolfe said. Enough to kill him. He drank it shortly before death, I said. Celia said he never drank coffee at night. He drank this one. Who prepared it? The cook poured it. Ruth Calder carried the tray from the kitchen. Simon Vale took it into the library. Wolfe's gaze remained on Kramer. Why did Miss Calder carry it? She says Vale asked her to. Why? He claims his hands were full of papers. Were they? He had a file and 3 envelopes. The envelopes later found on the desk. Yes, Wolfe folded his hands over his middle. Who requested the coffee? Val says Kettering did. Miss Calder, she says Vale told her Kettering wanted it. The cook, she received the order from the house telephone. Which extension? The library. I straightened in my chair. Who placed the call? Kramer gave me a sour look. The cook heard Kettering's voice. Recognized it. She has worked there 12 years. What exactly did the voice say? Kramer opened his notebook. Coffee black. Send it with Miss Calder. Wolfe grunted softly. Kramer looked at him. What? An odd instruction. Why? If Mr. Kettering wanted coffee, why specify who should carry it? Kramer's jaw moved. Maybe he wanted to speak to her. Yet, when she reached the passage, Mr. Vale took the tray from her. That may not have been planned. Everything in that library was planned. Kramer rose and began pacing. The lamp was rigged months ago. The poison was put in the coffee last night. Do not mix them unless you can prove they belong together. The poison killed him, Wolfe said. The lamp lied about when he was alive. They are already acquainted. Kramer stopped. Wolfe continued. You have 3 visitors. Harold Kettering at 10:12, Ruth Calder at 10:40, Simon Vale at 11:05. Which of them remained long enough to administer the poison? Vale. Too obvious. That does not make him innocent. Certainly not. Obvious men commit murders. They merely require better preparation. Kramer returned to the chair. Harold had motive. Kettering was changing his will. Ruth Calder had access to his papers and knew the house routines. Vale's business was in trouble. That last item had not been in my report. Wolfe noticed it too. Explain. Kettering and Vale Imports is missing $200,000. Missing from where? Client accounts. Kettering discovered it last week. Who controlled the accounts? Both partners officially. Vale handled daily operations. Did Kettering intend to act? He had an appointment with an accountant this morning. Wolfe looked at me. The letter to Mr. Vale instructed him to remain in the house and speak to no one, which could mean Kettering planned to confront him at breakfast, I said. Kramer said. Or it could mean Vale wrote the letter himself after killing him. The handwriting, Kettering's dictated to whom? Ruth Calder typed the drafts earlier. Vale claims Kettering copied them by hand. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Claims. The ink on all 3 letters was still wet enough to smudge when the evidence man handled them. I sat up. At nearly 10 in the morning. Kramer nodded. Special ink, slow drying, or written later. Exactly. Wolfe turned his head toward me. You did not report that. I did not know it. Then your facts were defective. I will complain to the police. Kramer ignored me. The laboratory is testing the ink. Meanwhile, I want to know what you have. Wolfe leaned back. Very little. 3 people entered the library and gave accounts of the lamp that contradict one another with suspicious precision. The poison traveled from the kitchen to the library through at least 2 pairs of hands. A telephone call in Kettering's voice ordered coffee and named its carrier. A hidden circuit created false light. A missing clock may have powered a false shadow. Someone intended not merely to kill Kettering, but to manufacture witnesses. Kramer's cigar had gone cold between his fingers. Manufacture them how? By giving each of them one piece of a prepared scene. Kramer stared at him. Wolfe indicated the 3 statements. Harold sees the lamp glowing. Ruth insists Kettering never used it. Vale insists he always used it. Each is invited to remember the lamp. That is not natural recollection, it is arranged emphasis. You think all three are in it together? I think all three are lying. That is not the same thing. Indeed, cooperation is only one reason for coordinated lies. Fear is another. So is blackmail. So is the belief that one is protecting an innocent person. I said, or each could be protecting himself for a different reason. Wolfe nodded. Better. Kramer stood. I will bring them in. Here. Kramer looked at him. Bring them here at 6 o'clock. This is not your investigation. Then conduct it without me. Kramer hesitated. He disliked Wolfe's office gatherings because Wolfe usually arranged the chairs, the facts, and Kramer with equal care. He also knew that refusing sometimes cost him a day. 6:30, he said. 6:15, Wolfe closed his eyes. Very well. Kramer left with the expression of a man who had purchased something above market price. At 4 o'clock, Wolfe went up to the plant rooms. Murder might alter the schedules of policemen, heirs, and business partners, but it did not alter the schedule of 10,000 orchids. I spent the interval checking facts. Harold Kettering had lied about staying upstairs. A taxicab driver had picked him up at the rear service entrance at 11:45 and taken him 6 blocks east, where Harold got out, walked around the corner, and returned to the house on foot. Ruth Calder had lied about never seeing the hidden light. Murphy found her initials on an old maintenance receipt for repairs to the lamp circuit. Simon Vale had lied about Kettering's love of bright rooms. 2 former employees told me Amos often worked in near darkness because strong light triggered headaches. 3 statements, 3 lies. Each lie touched the lamp, and each protected something else. At 6:14, they were seated in Wolfe's office. Harold took the red leather chair, though I had intended it for Ruth. He wore a navy suit, a pale tie, and a look of careless contempt that required effort. Ruth Calder sat upright near the bookshelves with her handbag in her lap. Simon Vale occupied the yellow chair and watched everyone except Harold. Kramer stood by the globe. Stebbins remained near the door. Celia Kettering had insisted on attending and sat beside me. Wolfe entered at 6:16, settled behind his desk, rang for beer, and inspected the 3 visitors. You have all lied, he said. Harold smiled. That is a dramatic beginning. It is a factual one. You lied about your movements. Miss Calder lied about the lamp. Mr. Vale lied about Mr. Kettering's habits. Ruth's fingers tightened around her handbag. Vale said, You cannot know his habits better than I did. I need not. Your statement contradicts the testimony of his daughter, his servants, and his physician. Celia looked at Vale. Father hated bright rooms. Vale did not turn toward her. Wolfe shifted his gaze to Harold. You left the house near midnight. Harold's smile disappeared. For 10 minutes. Why? To meet someone. Whom? That is private. Your uncle was dead or dying. Privacy has become expensive. Harold looked at Kramer, then back at Wolfe. I met Laura Dane. Why at the rear entrance? She is married. Kramer muttered something. Wolfe turned to Ruth. You knew the lamp had been altered. The receipt specifies a concealed display circuit. She said nothing. Did Mr. Kettering order it? Yes. Why? He would not tell me. Wolfe's eyes went to Vale. And you knew he disliked bright rooms. I exaggerated. You reversed the truth. I wanted the police to believe the lamp had been on normally. Why? Vale's right hand moved on the chair arm. Because, Wolfe said, you knew the lamp was not normal. The silence was clean and sharp. Kramer stepped forward. How did you know? Val looked at Ruth. It was a brief look, but it contained a conversation. Wolfe saw it. So did I. Mr. Val, Wolfe said, you and Miss Calder did not arrive independently at your lies. You agreed upon them. That is false, Ruth said quickly. Then why did he look at you before answering? She opened her mouth and closed it. Wolfe leaned back. The lamp was installed to create the appearance that Mr. Kettering was in the library when he was elsewhere. The projected shadow strengthened the illusion. It was an alibi machine. Mr. Kettering used it before last night. No one moved. Wolfe continued. At least 2 of you knew it. Perhaps all 3. You are not merely concealing who entered the library. You are concealing where Amos Kettering went while the lamp and shadow pretended he remained at his desk. Harold stared at the carpet. Ruth's face had lost color. Simon Vale said, "You are guessing." Wolfe's lips moved slightly. "Then correct me." Vale did not. Wolfe looked from one to another. "Where did Amos Kettering go on the previous occasions when the false light burned?" No one answered. That was answer enough. Then Ruth Calder spoke, so softly that Kramer asked her to repeat it. "He went to the room behind the collection vault." Celia turned to her. "There is no room behind the vault." Ruth looked at her with tired eyes. "There is," she said. "Your father called it the dark room." Wolfe reached for his beer. The lamp had not been built to illuminate the library. It had been built to hide an empty chair. Chapter 4. The shadow on the wall. I returned to the Kettering house the next morning with a key supplied by Celia, a written authorization that would annoy Kramer, and a request from Wolfe that sounded simple, only because he had stayed in his chair while making it. Discover what the lamp illuminated. I had reminded him that it illuminated the desk. "It does not," he had replied. "You reported a green circle upon the blotter because you expected one measure it. So at 9:30, I stood again in Amos Kettering's library with a tape measure, a pocket flashlight, and Sergeant Stebbins, who had been assigned to keep me from discovering anything privately. The police had removed the body, the coffee cup, the 3 letters, and most of the loose objects from the desk. They had left the lamp after Murphy disconnected the concealed basement circuit and marked every wire, without its artificial disc glowing beneath the socket. It looked innocent, which was probably the most dishonest appearance it had achieved. Stebbins watched me examine the shade. "What are you looking for?" "Light. You will find it faster by turning the lamp on. The ordinary bulb is police property. So is the lamp. I am working for the owner. The owner is dead. The next owner, then? That depends on the will. You have become legal since yesterday." He grunted and leaned against a bookcase. I had brought an ordinary 40-watt bulb from the brownstone. Murphy had confirmed that using it would disturb nothing of value. I screwed it into the socket, plugged the lamp into the temporary extension he had installed, and switched it on. The shade glowed green. The desk did not. There was a patch of light directly below the shade, but it was narrow, weak, and badly placed. The blotter remained mostly in shadow. A man seated in Kettering's chair could not have read a letter by it without bending, until his nose met the paper. I moved the shade, thinking the angle had been altered. It had not. A metal plate had been fitted inside the rear of the green glass, blocking much of the bulb's useful light. The plate looked decorative from outside, but it was too thick and too precisely shaped to be decoration. It was not used for reading. That has been said. Wolfe said it. I am confirming it, which is the athletic part of detection. I turned off the ceiling fixture and drew the curtains. The library became nearly black except for the green lamp. At once I saw what daylight had concealed. A narrow white beam escaped through a small circular opening in the rear of the brass housing. It crossed the room above the desk, missed the glass panel over the door by several feet, and struck a framed painting on the opposite wall. The picture was a portrait of an elderly man in judicial robes, possibly an ancestor and certainly disappointed in his descendants. The beam landed near his painted left shoulder, where it formed a bright point no larger than a dime. Stebbins came away from the bookcase. You see that? Otherwise I would have to describe it. We crossed the room. The portrait hung between 2 tall cabinets containing illuminated manuscripts. Its heavy gilt frame was bolted to a concealed bracket, probably because Amos Kettering trusted neither gravity nor visitors. The bright point touched a flower painted into the background, a pale white lily against dark paneling. I held my hand in front of it. The beam was sharply defined and stronger than anything a shaded 40-watt bulb should have produced. "There is a lens in the lamp," I said. Stebbins examined the hole. "Murphy missed it?" Murphy was asked to trace the wiring. Experts usually find what they are hired to find. I removed the bulb and looked into the lamp housing with my flashlight. Behind the metal plate was a short glass tube, angled through the rear opening. A polished reflector gathered light from the bulb and directed it through the tube. The false disc beneath the bulb had never illuminated the desk. It supplied enough glow to make the shade appear alive. The ordinary bulb, when switched on, powered the narrow beam aimed across the room. 2 lights, 2 circuits, 2 deceptions. I put the lamp back together and turned toward the portrait. "Help me lift it." Stebbins shook his head. "Evidence crew." "It is hanging on a bracket." "Evidence crew." "The murderer may be upstairs packing." "Evidence crew." I went to the house telephone and called Kramer. He expressed himself for nearly a minute, but he sent Murphy and a photographer. Sykes looked at the portrait. "Ephraim Kettering, Mr. Kettering's grandfather. Was he a judge?" "A state senator." He dressed ambitiously. The portrait was painted in costume for a historical society pageant that improved the family without explaining the lamp. "Has the picture been moved recently?" "Not to my knowledge." "Who cleans behind it?" "No one. It is secured to the wall." "Did Amos ever discuss it?" "He disliked it." "Then why display it?" "It belonged to his father." Family affection, family obligation. Murphy arrived with the photographer and a crime scene technician named Barlow. They documented the lamp opening, the beam, and the portrait. Then Murphy released 2 latches hidden beneath the frame. The picture swung outward on concealed hinges. Behind it was not a wall. A shallow recess had been cut into the paneling, 12 inches square and perhaps 6 inches deep. At its center stood a small glass lens, mounted over a black metal box. The lamp's beam struck the lens precisely. Murphy leaned close without touching it. "That is a photoelectric receiver." Stebbins frowned. In English, "Light hits the glass. The mechanism does something." "What?" "We will find out." The metal box had been screwed to the brick beneath the paneling. 2 wires emerged from its lower edge and disappeared downward. A narrow slot crossed the top, and beside it stood a numbered dial with positions from 1 to 12. The dial pointed to 7. I said, "A timer. Could be a selector," Murphy replied. "For what?" "He gave me the look technicians reserve for people who expect a machine to confess before breakfast." Barlow dusted the frame and box. He found several partial fingerprints, but nothing immediately useful. Murphy traced the wires down the wall to the floor, where they passed behind the baseboard toward Kettering's collection vault. That interested everybody. The vault occupied the north end of the library behind a steel door disguised as part of a bookcase. Amos had used it to store manuscripts, jewels, private ledgers, and whatever else wealthy collectors fear losing after spending their lives acquiring it. The police had opened it the previous day with a combination supplied by Simon Vale. Behind the vault, according to Ruth Calder, was the hidden chamber called the Dark Room. Kramer had searched it after the office meeting. He found a narrow space containing a chair, a telephone, a wall safe, and photographic equipment. He also found evidence that someone had recently removed files from the safe. He had not found the missing clock or an explanation for the lamp. Murphy removed a section of baseboard. The wires from the metal box continued behind the vault casing. Kramer arrived while he was working. He entered the library, saw the portrait hanging open, and looked at me. "You could not leave one wall alone." "The wall started it." He inspected the beam and the box. "What is it?" "Ask Murphy. He speaks electricity." Murphy explained. Kramer listened with the expression of a man being told his house had termites. "So when the lamp comes on," he said, "the beam hits the lens. If the lamp is aligned properly and activates the box." "Yes. What does the box activate?" "We are tracing it." Kramer turned to me. "Wolfe know about this?" He asked what the lamp illuminated. Has he been here? He has imagination. It saves cab fare. Kramer looked at the portrait. Why hide a switch behind a painting when there was already a switch in the basement? Because they did different things. You know that. The false disc could be switched on from the basement. The ordinary bulb could be switched on at the desk. The bulb sent a beam to this receiver. Correct. So whoever sat at the desk controlled something behind the vault. Also correct. What? That is where confidence ends, Murphy called from the vault doorway. He had found the wires entering the concealed chamber. We followed him through the steel door. The vault smelled of cold metal, old leather, and money. Shelves lined three sides. Empty spaces showed where the police had removed ledgers and document boxes. At the rear, a panel stood open on hidden hinges, revealing the dark room. It was 8 feet long and barely 5 feet wide. A padded chair faced a narrow shelf holding a telephone. Red glass covered the ceiling light. Photographic trays and chemical bottles occupied a counter. The small wall safe stood open. The wires from the portrait box entered through the brickwork and connected to a metal housing beneath the telephone shelf. Murphy opened it. Inside were 12 narrow reels mounted around a rotating drum. Each reel held a loop of transparent film. Kramer bent nearer. Pictures, silhouettes, Murphy said. He removed one loop carefully and held it toward the red light. A sequence of black shapes showed a broad, shouldered, bald man sitting, rising, bending over a desk, and sitting again. Amos Kettering's shadow. The numbered dial behind the portrait selected one of 12 loops. The beam from the lamp activated the drum. As the film moved before a tiny projector concealed inside the bronze owl, a repeating silhouette appeared on the glass above the library door. The mechanism had not merely produced a shadow. It had produced a choice of shadows. One showed Kettering writing, another showed him pacing, a third showed him standing motionless near the desk. A fourth showed 2 people apparently arguing. Kramer stared at that one longer than the others. This was an alibi machine, he said. That phrase has already been copyrighted by Wolfe. Murphy examined the drum. The lamp beam starts the selected loop. The basement switch turns on the false light. Someone in the library could set the dial behind the portrait, turn on the bulb, then leave. Someone in the basement could activate the green glow later. Kramer looked around the dark room. Why involve 2 switches? To make the performance controllable from 2 locations, I said. Or to require 2 people, he disliked that. So Harold, Ruth, and Vale could have operated it together. They could have. That does not mean they did. Ruth knew about the concealed circuit. Simon knew Kettering used the room in darkness. Harold returned through the service entrance near midnight, close to the basement control. Now you are thinking like a cop. I will apologize to Wolfe. Kramer ordered Stebbins to bring the 3 visitors back to the house. While he arranged it, I inspected the dark room. The chair cushion was indented. Fresh dust marks showed that a rectangular box had been removed from beneath the shelf. The wall safe contained only a few receipts, 2 photographic negatives, and an envelope with its flap torn away. The telephone had no dial. It connected directly to one line. I lifted the receiver. A bell rang in the library, not the house telephone, a softer bell hidden somewhere near the desk. Kramer came through the vault door. Put that down. I found an intercom. Murphy traced it. The bell was concealed inside the lamp base, a button beneath the dark room. Shelf allowed Kettering to signal someone seated in the library. A second button near the chair operated a tiny indicator behind the portrait lens. The machine was more than an alibi. It was a system of communication between an empty library and a hidden room. What did Kettering do in here? Kramer asked. Ruth called it the dark room. I know what she called it. There are photographic chemicals. I can see them. Rare manuscripts are sometimes photographed secretly before sale. So Kettering may have been copying documents he did not own. Kramer's eyes moved to the empty safe, or forging them. That possibility had weight. Kettering and Vale Imports handled rare books and private collections. If Amos had photographed valuable pages, reproduced seals, or substituted copies, The apparatus could conceal his absence from the library while he worked behind the vault. The portrait box contained another surprise. Barlow found a tiny latch beneath the lens. When pressed, it released a compartment holding 12 typed cards, one for each setting on the dial. The first read, seated, writing, the second standing at desk, the third, pacing, the fourth, two figures dispute, the fifth falling. Kramer read it twice. Falling. Murphy selected reel 5 and turned the drum manually. The black figure on the film raised one arm, staggered, and collapsed behind the projected outline of the desk. The loop repeated every 40 seconds. Summoner had designed a shadow of Amos Kettering dying. That changed the temperature of the room, Kramer said. When was this reel used? Murphy inspected the mechanism. All the reels have wear. Recently. I cannot tell. I looked at the dial behind the portrait. It had been set to 7, not 5. What is 7? Barlow handed me the card, empty room, curtains moving. We tested it. Murphy restored the connections temporarily. I turned on the lamp. The beam struck the lens. The drum began to rotate with a quiet ticking sound. In the passage, Stebbins reported that a shadow appeared above the library door. Not Kettering's shadow. The projection showed an empty room with curtains shifting as if a window stood open. Yet both library windows had been fastened from within. Wolfe had said the room was full of objects performing duties they had not been designed for. The lamp did not light. The clock did not tell time. The owl did not watch. Now the painting did not decorate, and the shadow did not belong to a man. Each object supported a different lie. At 11:20, Harold Kettering arrived with Ruth Calder and Simon Vale under police escort. Kramer assembled them in the library, near the desk where Amos had died. Harold saw the open portrait first. His face tightened before he could stop it. Ruth looked at the lens, then at the exposed wiring. She seemed tired rather than surprised. Simon Vale stood absolutely still. Kramer pointed toward the recess. Which of you knew about that? No one answered. He held up the film loop showing Kettering's silhouette. Which of you operated it last night? Harold found his voice. I have never seen it, Ruth said. I knew there was a mechanism. I did not know what it contained. Vale's tone was controlled. Amos showed it to me years ago. Kramer swung toward him. Why? It amused him. A machine that faked his presence amused him. Amos enjoyed deceiving people. Celia, who had entered behind them, said he enjoyed controlling them. Vale glanced at her. That too, I asked Ruth. Why did you sign the repair invoice? Kettering told me it was part of the vault alarm. Did you believe him? At the time, and later. She looked toward the dark room. Later I understood that he used it when he met people privately. Who, I do not know. Kramer said, you expect me to believe that? I typed his correspondence. I managed his appointments. I knew when he claimed to be in the library, but was not. I did not know whom he met. Harold gave a short laugh without humor. Everyone knew. Kramer turned. You did. I knew my uncle disappeared. I did not know how he created the shadow. Where did he go? Sometimes into the vault, sometimes out through the service passage. Why did you lie about staying upstairs last night? Harold looked at Celia and then away. I thought he was using the machine again, at 11:45. Yes. So you went to the rear entrance. I wanted to follow him. Did you? There was a cab waiting. I thought he had arranged it. I got in and told the driver to follow the car ahead. What car? A black sedan leaving the alley. Who was in it? I could not see. Where did it go? East. I lost it near Park Avenue. I dismissed the cab and returned. Why conceal that? Because my uncle was dead when I got back, and I had no witness for where I had gone. Kramer looked at Simon Vale. Did you leave in the sedan? Vale's expression did not change. I remained in the house. Your letter ordered you to. So you keep reminding me. Ruth spoke quietly. Simon was not in his room at midnight. Vale turned toward her. Kramer's voice sharpened. How do you know? I knocked. Why? She hesitated. Wolfe had said that coordinated lies might come from fear, blackmail, or the belief that one was protecting an innocent person. Ruth had been looking at Vale every time the pressure increased. Now she seemed to have reached the edge of whatever protection she had intended. I wanted to warn him, she said. About what? Kettering had discovered the missing money. Val's control cracked. Be quiet, Ruth. She did not look at him. He planned to accuse Simon at breakfast, but Simon did not take the money. Kramer moved closer. Who did? Ruth's lips parted, but no answer came. A faint click sounded behind us. The lamp had gone out. Every head turned toward it. The ordinary bulb was dark. The temporary extension still carried power. The switch remained on. Murphy crossed to the desk and tested the cord. Current is present. He removed the bulb. The filament was intact. Then he looked at the open portrait. The lens behind it had rotated. A small metal shutter now covered the glass, cutting off the beam. When the beam vanished, a relay inside the lamp had broken the ordinary circuit. Someone had operated the concealed mechanism from elsewhere in the house. Kramer sent Stebbins to the basement. Another man ran to the dark room. We waited in the green dusk of the library, listening to their footsteps. Stebbins called from the service stairs. The basement switchbox was open. The missing brass clock lay on the floor beneath it. Its glass face had been broken, and its hands had been fixed permanently at 11:40. Beneath the clock was a folded strip of paper. Kramer opened it with gloved fingers. 5 words had been typed on it. You saw only the shadow. No one in the library spoke. I looked from Harold to Ruth to Simon. Their statements had fitted together neatly because they had all been describing the same prepared illusion from different sides. But one of them had known more than the others. One of them had just proved that the machinery could still be operated from a place the police had not found, and somewhere inside the Kettering house, behind walnut walls, steel cabinets, and portraits of disappointed ancestors. There was another switch. Chapter 5. The silent signal, the black metal box behind the portrait, was removed shortly after noon, under the combined supervision of Inspector Kramer, 2 police technicians, and Sykes, who watched every loosened screw as if the city intended to steal the wall. It was taken to the long dining room because Murphy wanted space to dismantle it. Kramer ordered Harold Kettering, Ruth Calder, Simon Vale, and Celia to remain in the house. Harold objected that he had an appointment downtown. Kramer suggested that he cancel it unless he preferred an appointment at headquarters. Harold cancelled. Wolfe had refused to come. I telephoned him from the library and described the newly discovered mechanism. The numbered films, the broken clock fixed at 11:40, and the message reading, "You saw only the shadow." He listened without interrupting, which was encouraging. When I finished, he said, "The metal box behind the painting. What does it contain? Murphy is about to open it. Then call me when he has. You could come and watch." I could also stand in the rain and direct traffic. Neither activity attracts me. The rain has stopped. That does not improve traffic. He hung up. Murphy opened the box at 12:27. Kramer stood on one side of him, and I stood on the other. Stebbins guarded the door, though no one was likely to steal a machine surrounded by policemen. The box contained no documents, jewels, poison, weapon, or confession. Its central compartment held a square photographic plate mounted in a brass frame. The glass had been darkened almost completely by repeated exposure. Behind it was a narrow copper strip connected to a simple electrical contact. Murphy lifted the frame carefully. "That is all," Kramer said. Murphy turned the box upside down, which did not improve it. "There may have been another part," he said. "Where?" "Removed. Everything in this house has been removed." "Not everything," I said. "We still have the house." Kramer ignored me. "What did the plate do?" Murphy held it toward the window. "It registered light." We knew the box received the lamp beam. This plate was not a switch. It is ordinary photographic glass. Light darkened the coating over time. So it recorded how often the lamp was used. Possibly, but it would not give dates or times. Kramer's cigar moved from one corner of his mouth to the other. Then why conceal it? Murphy examined the copper contact. The light striking the plate may have completed a circuit through a selenium cell beneath it. The plate itself could have filtered or weakened the beam. Filtered it for what? Murphy looked at the wall. I did too. The recess behind the painting appeared to end at brick, but a narrow circular hole passed through the rear of the metal box. It aligned exactly with the lamp beam. The glass plate had not stopped the light. It had reduced and focused it before allowing it to continue into the wall. Bring the flashlight, I said. Kramer objected to the tone, but Murphy handed it to me. I aimed it through the hole. The beam vanished into a thin metal tube embedded in the brickwork. The tube did not turn downward toward the vault. It continued straight through the wall. Kramer said, "What is on the other side?" Sykes answered from the doorway. The neighboring residence. The Kettering mansion shared its eastern wall with a narrower brownstone owned by a widow named Margaret Lorne. The two houses appeared separate from the street, but their upper stories touched, with only a party wall between them. Kramer sent Stebbins to find Mrs. Lorne. I went to the library window and inspected the neighboring effacade. The Lorne house was 4 stories high, 1 floor shorter than Kettering's mansion. Its upper windows were covered by white curtains. A small iron balcony projected from the 2nd floor. The front door was painted black and polished well enough to reflect the street. One window interested me. It was directly opposite the concealed tube, though from inside the Kettering house the arrangement was difficult to judge. Its curtains were closed, but there was a small circular opening near the center of the left pane, no larger than a shirt button. Kramer joined me. You see it? The hole in the curtain, possibly. I see it. Then we visit the neighbor. Mrs. Margaret Lorne received us in a sitting room, crowded with porcelain dogs and photographs of people who had made the mistake of being related to her. She was 70, upright, and wrapped in black silk. Her silver hair was arranged so firmly that it might have resisted weather. She looked at Kramer's badge. Has Amos finally murdered someone? He was murdered, Kramer said. Mrs. Lorne considered that. Then someone became impatient. Kramer asked whether the police could inspect her upper floor. You may inspect anything except my husband's letters. Your husband is deceased? For 17 years. His letters have improved with age. She led us upstairs. The room aligned with Kettering's library was not a bedroom. It was a narrow chamber used for storing furniture. Dust sheets covered chairs and cabinets. At the far end, the window curtains had been pinned shut. Murphy entered behind us, carrying a measuring instrument. He examined the wall opposite the window and found a brass tube emerging through the plaster. A tiny lens had been fitted over it. When he switched on the Kettering lamp by telephone instruction, a green point appeared on the lens. It was no larger than a match head. Mrs. Lorne stared at it. That light, she said. Kramer turned. You have seen it before? Many times. When? At night, usually after 11. Did you know where it came from? I assumed it belonged to one of Amos's childish devices. Who watched it? She looked toward the window. People in the street. That silenced the room. I crossed to the curtain. The small opening I had seen from the Kettering library was deliberate. A brass eyelet had been sewn into the cloth. When I looked through it, I could see the opposite sidewalk, the corner of Park Avenue, and the entrance of a narrow alley beside the Kettering house. From the street, anyone watching the upper window would see the green point. Not bright enough to illuminate the room, not strong enough to attract casual attention, but visible to a person who knew where to look. A silent signal. Kramer asked Mrs. Lorne, who had entered the room. Amos did. How? Through the connecting door. There was a connecting door hidden behind a tall wardrobe. It had been sealed on the lawn side with decorative paneling, but the lock still worked. Mrs. Lorne explained that the houses had once belonged to 2 brothers. A passage between them had been built before either Amos or Margaret was born. Did Kettering have a key? Kramer asked. He owned the adjoining house for 6 months before selling it to my husband. He kept keys to everything. And you allowed him to use this room? I did not allow him. I tolerated him. Why? Mrs. Lorne's expression hardened. Because Amos knew something about my husband that I did not wish repeated. Kramer stepped closer. What? That is not connected with his death. That is for me to decide. It concerned an investment made 30 years ago. My husband had trusted the wrong men. Amos possessed papers that could have ruined his name. Blackmail. He called it an understanding. I said. What did the green light mean? She looked at me. It meant the way was clear. For whom? I never knew. Someone on the street. Yes, what happened after the signal appeared? Sometimes a car stopped near the alley. Sometimes a man entered the catering service door. On 2 occasions, a woman came through my front entrance and used the connecting passage. Who was she? She wore a veil. Kramer's cigar had gone out, but he continued chewing it. When did you last see the green point? Last night. What time? Mrs. Lorne looked toward the window. At 11:35. That was 5 minutes before Rowan Bell claimed to have seen Kettering's shadow, and 5 minutes before the hands on the missing clock had been fixed. Did anyone arrive? I asked. A black sedan stopped across the street at approximately 11:40. A man got out. Could you identify him? Number, he wore a dark coat and hat. Did he enter the Kettering house? He went into the alley. Did he leave? I saw the sedan depart at 11:45, but I did not see whether the man was inside. That was the car Harold claimed to have followed. Kramer ordered a complete search of the lawn room behind a covered cabinet. Stebbins found a folding chair positioned to face the window. Beneath it lay 3 cigarette ends of an imported brand Simon Vale smoked. Simon had claimed he never entered the neighboring house. The evidence was becoming less respectful of his claims. At 3 o'clock, I returned to West 35th Street with photographs, measurements, and a diagram drawn by Murphy. Wolfe was in the office dictating a letter to an orchid supplier. I waited until he finished informing the man that inferior compost was not improved by optimistic labeling. Then I placed the diagram on his desk. The beam passed through the box, through the party wall, and into an upstairs room in the adjoining house. From the street it appeared as a green point in the window. Mrs. Lorne says it meant the way was clear. She saw it at 11:30, 5 last night. A black sedan arrived 5 minutes later, and a man entered the alley. Wolfe inspected the diagram, the photographic plate. Darkened by repeated exposure, Murphy thinks it filtered the light. Not merely filtered, confirmed. Confirmed what? That the signal had been sent often. A photographic tally. A crude one. Each exposure darkened the plate. Mr. Kettering wished to preserve evidence that the beam had been activated. For what purpose? Insurance. Against whom? Whoever received the signal. He leaned back and closed his eyes. I waited. Wolfe's eyes remained closed long enough for me to consider the beer bottle, the diagram, and the possibility that he had gone to sleep. Then he spoke. The lamp's apparent purpose has misled everyone. It was not arranged to illuminate the library. Its hidden disk created a false glow. Its bulb sent a concentrated beam through the wall. The green shade was selected because the signal itself had to be green. So the lamp was a signaling device, disguised as an alibi device. Both functions served the same enterprise. The false shadow persuaded those inside the house that Kettering remained in his library. The green point informed someone outside that he had left it. Left for the dark room, or the alley, or the neighboring house. I sat in the red chair. That means the machine needed at least 2 observers. One inside to see the shadow, one outside to see the signal. Precisely. Harold saw the lamp. Rowan saw the shadow. Mrs. Lorne saw the point. Everyone was placed where a fragment of the performance would reach them. Placed, perhaps encouraged. Better. I told him about the imported cigarette ends. Mr. Vale's brand. Yes. Common. Not common enough to make him happy. Have they been tested? Kramer has them. Wolfe opened his eyes. Then Mr. Vale watched the signal from the adjoining house on previous occasions. Likely. Do not blur likelihood into fact. I would not dream of it. You do so hourly. I described Mrs. Lorne's blackmail arrangement and the veiled woman who had twice crossed through the connecting passage. Wolfe's brows rose. When? Mrs. Lorne could remember one date precisely October 9th. The other was about 3 weeks earlier. Who was in the Kettering house on October 9th? I have not checked. Check. Before dinner. Immediately. Fritz entered to announce that shad roe with anchovy butter would be served in 12 minutes. Wolfe looked at the clock and then at me. Also determine who owned the black sedan. Kramer is already doing that. Then determine it first. I got the answer at 6:17. The sedan belonged to Kettering and Vale Imports. Simon Vale used it frequently, but on the night of the murder it had been signed out by Ruth Calder. That earned Ruth another visit to the office. She arrived at 8 with Kramer, Stebbins, and Simon Vale. Harold came separately after learning that we had discovered the neighboring room. Celia sat near the bookshelves. Mrs. Lorne refused to attend but sent a written statement. Wolfe waited until everyone was seated. The lamp, he said, was a signal. Simon's face remained still. Ruth looked at the carpet. Harold said, "A signal to whom?" "To a person waiting outside." The hidden beam passed through the wall and appeared as a green point in Mrs. Lorne's upstairs window at 11:35 last night. That signal was activated. 5 minutes later, a black sedan belonging to Kettering and Vale Imports stopped across the street. Wolfe turned to Ruth. "You signed out that sedan?" She raised her head. "Yes. Why?" "Mr. Kettering instructed me to." "When?" "At 6 yesterday evening." "For whom?" "He did not say." "Who drove it?" "I left the key beneath the front seat, as instructed." Kramer growled. "You omitted that earlier." "I was afraid." "Of what?" Ruth looked at Simon. He spoke sharply. "Do not involve me." Wolfe's voice was quiet. "You are already involved, sir. Your cigarettes were found beside the signaling window." Val's face altered, though only slightly. "I entered that room months ago." "To watch for the signal." He said nothing. Wolfe continued. "Mr. Kettering had discovered missing funds. He intended to confront you. Yet the signal summoned someone at the exact hour when the false shadow established that he remained alive. Either Kettering himself arranged a secret meeting, or his murderer used Kettering's machinery to summon a witness." Harold leaned forward. "A witness to what?" "Not to the murder. To Kettering's apparent departure." Wolfe looked toward Ruth, who was expected in the alley. Her lips trembled. Simon rose from his chair. "Ruth, be silent." Kramer moved between him and the door. Wolfe's gaze did not leave Ruth. The green point meant the way was clear. Whom did it call? Ruth pressed both hands together. Then she answered, "Amos Kettering." Celia stared at her. "My father was already inside." Ruth shook her head. The man in the library was not Amos. The office became motionless. Wolfe leaned back, his eyes half closed. At last, the silent signal had spoken. Chapter 6. The man across the road, Ruth Calder's statement that the man in the library had not been Amos Kettering produced 3 different reactions. Celia rose so abruptly that her chair struck the bookcase. Harold stared at Ruth as though she had spoken in a language he had never heard. Simon Vale closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them with the expression of a man who had found the door locked behind him. Inspector Kramer stepped closer to Ruth. "Who was in the library?" "I do not know." "You just said it was not Kettering." "I said the man who gave me the automobile instructions was not Amos." Kramer's jaw tightened. "Start at the beginning." Ruth looked at Wolfe, not at Kramer. Perhaps she had decided that if she had to tell the truth, she preferred to deliver it to someone who would recognize the better parts. "At 6 o'clock yesterday evening, I received a call on the office extension. The voice said Mr. Kettering wanted the company sedan placed across from the house at 11:30. The key was to be left beneath the front seat." "You recognized the voice?" Wolfe asked. "I thought I did. It sounded like Mr. Kettering, but the words were too careful. He usually spoke quickly and expected everyone else to keep up." "A recorded voice?" I suggested. "Possibly." "Or an imitation," Kramer said. Ruth nodded. Later, when I carried the coffee tray upstairs, I heard the same voice from inside the library. It said, "Leave it with Mr. Vale." But when Simon opened the door, the room behind him was dark except for the green lamp. Celia gripped the back of her chair. "You saw my father." I saw a figure seated at the desk. The shade hid his face. Simon said, "This is absurd." Ruth turned toward him. "You told me Amos was writing letters." "He was. You did not let me enter." "Because he had ordered you away? Or because he was not there?" Kramer moved between them before the exchange became physical, though Ruth did not look likely to use anything heavier than accuracy. "Wolfe rang for beer, Mr. Vale," he said. "You were accustomed to waiting across the street for the green signal." Simon's head turned. "Who told you that?" "No one yet. Your cigarettes were found beside the observation window. The company sedan was placed where the signal could be seen. You knew the significance of the green point, therefore you had watched it before. That is conjecture. It is also true." Simon sat down slowly. Fritz entered with beer for Wolfe and coffee for Kramer. I got nothing, which was fair because I had not asked. Wolfe poured, watched the foam settle, and addressed Simon again. "What did the signal mean?" Simon said nothing. Kramer placed both hands on the back of the yellow chair. "We can continue this downtown. You have no charge. I can think of several while we travel." Wolfe drank and wiped his lips. "Your silence has lost value, Mr. Vale. The machinery has been found. The neighboring room has been found. The automobile has been identified. What remains is purpose, and purpose may be obtained from another witness." That was a bluff, but it was a good one because Wolfe said it as though the witness was waiting in the hall. Simon looked at Ruth. "Did you tell them?" "I told them nothing about the records." His face hardened. Kramer leaned forward. "What records?" The room waited. Simon understood that Ruth had not betrayed him intentionally, but intention was no longer important. He looked toward Wolfe. "Amos kept private ledgers in the wall safe behind the vault. We know of the safe," Wolfe said. "You do not know what was in it. Enlighten us." "Records of payments, purchases made under false names, commissions that did not appear in the company books. Amos had spent 20 years building a private business inside our partnership." Celia said, "That is a lie." Simon looked at her. "Your father kept copies of everything because he trusted no one, not even himself." "What did the green signal tell you?" Wolfe asked. "That he had opened the safe." Kramer stared at him. "How could the lamp tell you that? The safe door contained an electrical contact. When Amos unlocked it, the circuit became available. He still had to activate the lamp, but he usually did. He used the green point to summon people for private meetings." "And you used it to enter the house?" Simon's mouth tightened. "Yes. Without Kettering's permission." "Yes." The admission did not surprise Wolfe, but it improved Kramer's posture. Simon continued. "There is a rear passage from the alley to the vault corridor. Amos believed only he and Sykes knew of it. I discovered it 3 years ago." "How?" "I followed him." "Why?" "Because money was disappearing from the company." Ruth spoke quietly. "You told me you were protecting the firm." "I was." Kramer gave a short laugh. "By breaking into your partner's safe. By copying evidence. Why not confront him?" "Because Amos would have destroyed the records and blamed me." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "How often did you enter?" "Perhaps 12 times. The photographic plate had been exposed more often than that. The signal was not intended only for me." "For whom else?" "I do not know." That answer might have been true, which made it inconvenient. Wolfe said, "You waited in the street until the green point appeared, entered through the alley, passed along the rear corridor, and copied documents from the open safe while Mr. Kettering was occupied elsewhere." "Yes." "Why would he leave the safe open?" "He often moved records between the dark room and the library. When he entertained a visitor, he sometimes left the safe unlocked for several minutes. Then the false shadow protected his own secret meetings, while the green point allowed you to exploit them." Simon nodded reluctantly. It was an elegant arrangement in the way a spiderweb is elegant. Kettering had built machinery to deceive his household. Simon had learned the pattern and used the deception against him. Each man believed himself the only intelligence in the house, a condition Wolfe regarded as common and usually fatal. Kramer asked, "What did you find in the records?" "Payments to dealers, judges, customs men and private collectors. Some were legitimate, some were not. There were also transfers from company accounts into holding firms controlled by Amos. The missing 200,000, number that money was transferred later and under my authorization." Ruth looked at him. "Simon." He ignored her. Kramer said, "So you did take it. I moved it. To where?" "A protected account." "In whose name?" Simon hesitated. That hesitation answered before he did. Ruth Calder-Celia stared at her. Ruth's face went white. "I did not know. You signed the papers," Simon said. "You told me they were tax documents. They were intended to protect you." "From what?" "From Amos." Kramer pulled out his notebook. "This is becoming educational." Wolfe regarded Simon with open distaste. "You transferred company funds into an account controlled by Miss Calder, then allowed Mr. Kettering to discover the shortage. I intended to restore it after I secured copies of the ledgers." "Why involve Miss Calder?" Simon's voice lowered. "Because Amos had threatened her." Ruth stood. "That is enough." Wolfe raised a finger. "Sit down, madam. Concealment has already killed one man. It may yet endanger another." She remained standing for 2 seconds, then sat. Simon continued. "Ruth found irregular entries in the company books. Amos learned that she had copied them. He told her he would accuse her of embezzlement unless she surrendered the copies. So you moved funds into her name," I said, giving him evidence that could be used against her. "I needed an account. Amos would not immediately connect to me." "That was generous." Simon looked at me with no affection. Wolfe said, "On the night of the murder, what did the green signal tell you?" "That the safe was open. You were across the road." "Yes." "From what time?" 11:20. "Who saw you?" "No one that I knew." That was corrected the following morning by a night watchman named Caleb Hurst. Hurst worked for a private security company that patrolled the jewelry shops and residential blocks between Park and Lexington. He was 60 thin and equipped with a blue uniform, a flashlight, and the solemn importance of a man who possessed keys to other people's doors. So I found him at a basement office on Madison Avenue after Kramer's men had failed to ask the right garage attendant. Hurst remembered Simon Vale's sedan. "It was there plenty of nights," he told me. "Sime Place across from the Kettering house. Sometimes Mr. Vale sat in it for an hour." "You knew him?" "He gave me his card once, said he had trouble sleeping and liked to drive." "Did you believe him?" Hurst considered. "Rich men do stranger things." "Did he watch the house?" "He watched an upstairs window next door." "The one with the green point?" Hurst's eyes sharpened. "You know about that." "I collect colored lights. I saw it maybe 6 or 7 times, small green dot. When it came on, Mr. Vale got out and went around the corner." "Into the alley, I suppose." "Last night. He arrived at 11:18. The green light appeared about 11:35. What did he do?" "He waited." "That was new." "For how long?" "5 minutes, perhaps more." Then another man crossed the street and approached the alley. "Describe him." "Dark overcoat, gray hat, medium height, walked with a cane." "Could it have been Amos Kettering?" Hurst shook his head. "Kettering was bigger." "What did Vale do?" "He got out and followed the man." "Did they enter the alley?" "Yes." "Did either return?" "Mr. Vale returned alone around 11:50. He looked sick. He drove away, but the car came back later." "Driven by whom?" "I could not see." That last detail fitted Harold's account of following the sedan at 11:45, but it did not fit Simon's, according to Hurst. Simon had not left at 11:45. He had returned to the car later. When I reported this at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the dining room, finishing a lunch involving duck, baked onions, and a sauce Fritz refused to explain. Wolfe listened, placed his fork down, and asked one question. Did the watchman see the figure in the library? He saw only the green signal. Then the signal brought two men to the alley, Vale and the man with the cane. Possibly the person who removed the records. Or the person who killed Kettering. I sat opposite him. Simon admits entering through the rear passage to copy financial records. He says the green point indicated the safe was open. He followed the second man into the alley. At some point, Kettering caught him. When Simon says 11:42, where? In the dark room. What occurred? He will not say without his lawyer. Wolfe resumed eating. That is nearly a confession. To murder. To stupidity. Murder remains unproved. Kramer brought Simon to the office at 5 that afternoon. Ruth came with him voluntarily. Hurst was placed in the front room with Stebbins until Wolfe required him. Simon had consulted an attorney, but the attorney had advised him to answer questions that did not directly incriminate him. Since nearly every useful question did, the arrangement lacked charm. Wolfe began without ceremony. You entered the rear passage after the signal appeared. Yes. You followed a man with a cane. I saw no such man. The watchman did. Simon looked toward Kramer. Kramer smiled unpleasantly. Wolfe continued. You reached the dark room. Mr. Kettering was there. Simon said nothing. He had discovered your repeated intrusions. Still nothing. He knew you had copied his financial records. Simon's hands tightened, and he threatened to expose you as a thief before you could expose him as one. Ruth whispered, Simon, tell them. He turned to her. You do not understand. Then explain. For the first time, his control failed completely. Amos was waiting for me, he said. He had left the safe open deliberately. The signal was bait. Kramer stepped nearer. What happened? He showed me the empty compartment. The original ledgers were gone. He said he had moved them, and that the copies I possessed were worthless without authentication. What did he want? The copies returned, the money restored. Ruth dismissed. Ruth stared at him. Simon looked away. He said if I refused, he would report the transfer and claim Ruth and I had conspired to steal from the company. He had prepared letters for the police and the bank. The 3 sealed letters. I asked, number others. Where are they? I do not know. Kramer said, Did you kill him? Simon faced him. I left him alive. At what time? 11:46. Who was with him? No one. The man with the cane. I saw no man. Wolfe's voice became quieter. You are lying again, but not about killing him. Simon looked at him. You entered because of the green signal. You expected an open safe. Instead, you found Kettering waiting. He threatened you. That explains motive, opportunity, and concealment. Yet you returned to your car visibly shaken rather than fleeing permanently. You also left the poisoned coffee in the library, though you had ample reason to remove it if you had administered it. Simon said nothing. The poison had already been given. Wolfe continued. Kettering knew he was dying. Ruth covered her mouth. Kramer's eyes narrowed. How do you know? Because his confrontation with Vale was not an attempt to save himself. It was an attempt to control what followed his death. Wolfe turned to Simon. When you entered the dark room, what condition was he in? Simon's resistance lasted 3 seconds. He was sweating. His hands shook. He had trouble standing. Did he mention poison? Did he drink anything? Water from a glass near the safe. Did he return to the library? Yes, how? Through the vault. Alone. Simon looked toward Ruth again. Wolfe struck the desk with his palm, not loudly, but with enough authority to end the hesitation. The man with the cane, sir. Simon swallowed. He was waiting in the rear passage. Who was he? I never saw his face. Then describe what you saw. He wore gloves and a grey hat. He carried a cane with a silver handle. Kettering spoke to him as if they knew each other. What did Kettering say? Simon looked at Wolfe. He said, You are late. The light has already betrayed us. The sentence settled over the office. The lamp had signaled that the safe was open. Simon had answered. Another man had answered too. Kettering had been waiting for both. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. The man across the road had not gone to the Kettering house merely to steal records. He had been summoned to witness the final act of a plan Amos Kettering had begun before the poison reached his coffee. Chapter 7. The lamp that lied. Inspector Kramer remained dissatisfied with the lamp. This was understandable. He had accused the bulb of being replaced, the wiring of concealing a timer, the basement switch of establishing the hour of death, and Simon Vale of operating the whole arrangement, while simultaneously poisoning Amos Kettering, copying financial records, following a man with a cane, and returning to his automobile in time to look guilty for a watchman. The lamp had survived every accusation without becoming more cooperative. Kramer arrived at the brownstone shortly after 10 the next morning, while Wolfe was in the plant rooms. He entered the office without waiting for an invitation, dropped his hat on the red leather chair, and placed the green-shaded lamp on my desk. The police had packed it in a wooden evidence crate, but Kramer had apparently decided that carrying the crate upstairs was beneath the dignity of the law. "There," he said. I looked at it. "It has not improved." The laboratory examined every inch of it. And they found the hidden beam tube, the double wiring, the false socket, and the remote circuit. They found nothing that explains why the lamp was glowing when the body was discovered. The concealed disc explains it. Number Kramer planted both hands on my desk. The disc was disconnected before midnight. That got my attention. Disconnected by whom? If I knew, I would not be here. He removed a laboratory report from his coat and slapped it down. The wires supplying the disc were cut inside the lamp stem, not recently. Oxidation indicates at least several weeks. I read the relevant lines. Murphy had assumed the disc was connected because the basement switch controlled a circuit leading to the lamp. In fact, the circuit had reached only as far as a relay inside the base. The final wires to the luminous disc had been cut. So the false light beneath the bulb did not work, I said. Correct. But Stebbins saw it go on and off when Murphy tested the basement switch. He saw the shade brighten. He did not see the disc itself. That sounds like a distinction Wolfe would charge for. Kramer straightened. The laboratory reconstructed the circuit. The hidden disc could not have produced light on the night of the murder. Then something else did. That is the part I had already reached. He retrieved his hat from the red chair but did not put it on. The bulb was cold. It was not receiving power. The disc was disconnected, yet you Sykes, Stebbins, Rowan Bell, and 3 patrolmen saw the green shade glowing. Perhaps mass suggestion. Perhaps I will arrest you for obstructing gravity. At 11, Wolfe descended from the plant rooms. He entered the office with a spray of yellow orchid pollen on one sleeve, saw Kramer, saw the lamp, and stopped. "You have brought an object I deliberately avoided carrying." Kramer pointed at it. "It was glowing when the body was found. So Mr. Goodwin has repeatedly informed me. The bulb was dead. Not dead, unlit. The concealed disc was disconnected." Wolfe's brows rose. "That is moderately interesting." "Moderately. It removes an unnecessary complication." Kramer stared at him. Wolfe crossed to his desk and settled into his chair. Fritz entered with beer. Wolfe poured, waited for the foam, and drank before giving the lamp another glance. "Archie removed the shade," Kramer said. "The laboratory already did. Did they separate the glass from its metal frame?" I looked at the lamp. The shade appeared to be a single green glass shell, held inside a brass rim. 3 small screws fastened the rim to the supporting arms. "The report does not mention it," I said. "Remove it." Kramer growled. "This is evidence. It has already been examined by people who know what they are doing. Then it is safe from Archie." I fetched a screwdriver. Kramer objected twice, but he did not stop me. I removed the 3 screws and lifted the shade from the lamp. It was heavier than ordinary glass, Wolfe said. "Turn it over." The inner surface appeared dark green and slightly uneven. A thin brass lining followed the curve of the shade. At first I took it for a reflector, but when I pressed one edge, it shifted. A narrow seam became visible, I inserted the screwdriver carefully and raised the brass layer. Beneath it was a flexible panel, no thicker than cardboard. Tiny bulbs had been embedded throughout the material in a pattern matching the shape of the shade. 2 flat batteries lay concealed near the upper rim. A pressure switch was hidden beneath the decorative brass cap. Kramer leaned over my shoulder. "What is that?" The laboratory's next embarrassment. The panel was independent of the lamp's electrical wiring. It required no wall outlet, no basement switch, and no functioning bulb. When powered, the entire green shade would glow from within. The bulb beneath it served only as a convincing disguise. Wolfe held out a hand. I gave him the shade. He examined the inner rim without rising. "There is a timer," he said. Kramer bent closer. "Where?" "This wheel beneath the battery housing. It has 12 settings." I took it back and found a small numbered dial, partly concealed beneath the lining. It was similar to the selector behind the portrait, but smaller. The wheel had been set between 8 and 9. Murphy was called. He arrived 40 minutes later with Stebbins and enough equipment to repair a subway. After testing the batteries and contacts, he confirmed Wolfe's conclusion. "The shade can be programmed to light after a delay," Murphy said. "Once activated, it stays on for about 10 hours or until the battery dies." Kramer looked at the cold bulb. So someone could set the timer before the murder. The shade would begin glowing later and remain lit until the body was found. "Precisely," Wolfe said. "That was meant to confuse the time of death, not primarily." Kramer's face darkened. "Everything with you has a second purpose. Objects do not. People do." Wolfe indicated the shade. The apparatus had to accomplish 3 things. It had to appear to be an ordinary lamp. It had to glow without heating the bulb. And it had to remain illuminated after the household electrical system was disturbed. Disturbed how? By the opening of the safe, the operation of the signal, or the disconnection of the remote circuits. Kramer sat in the yellow chair. The shade was the final lie. Wolfe shook his head. "The first, everything else depended upon the assumption that the lamp was lit. I said, Harold saw it glowing before 10:15. Ruth said, Kettering, never used it. Simon claimed he always did. Rowan saw light beneath the door at 11:40. Sykes found it still glowing in the morning." "Exactly," Wolfe said. Each witness accepted the same false premise. They saw a glowing green shade and concluded that a lamp was operating. Kramer looked at the timer. When was it set? Murphy calculated from the remaining battery charge and the mechanical position. Approximate activation between 9:40 and 10. "Before Harold entered the library," I said. Kramer opened his notebook. "Who was with the lamp at that time?" Sykes's household schedule supplied the answer. Amos Kettering had dined at 8. At 9:15 he entered the library alone. Ruth Calder brought him correspondence at 9:30 and left at 9:38. Harold arrived at 10:12. Simon Vale did not enter until after 11. That left Amos and Ruth with the earliest opportunity. Kramer said, "Ruth set it." "Perhaps," Wolfe replied. "She knew about the concealed wiring. She signed an invoice. She arranged the sedan. She obeyed an instruction. She carried the poisoned coffee. She carried it to the passage. Vale took it inside." Kramer's patience wore through. "Then Kettering set the shade himself. That is more likely. To create a false alibi for his own movements. To prepare the room for what he expected." The office became quiet. I said, "He expected to die." Wolfe's eyes came to me. "He knew he had been poisoned," I continued. "Simon said he was sweating and shaking in the dark room. Instead of calling a doctor, Kettering confronted him and summoned the man with the cane. He had already set the lamp to glow through the night." "Good," Wolfe said. Kramer looked from one of us to the other. "You think Kettering arranged the entire scene after taking the poison?" "Not after," Wolfe said. "Before. You are saying he planned his own murder?" "I am saying he anticipated an attempt upon his life and prepared to identify the culprit." "Then why is the culprit not identified?" "Because one part of his plan was removed, the clock." "Possibly. The financial records, certainly, and something from the lamp." Murphy frowned. "Nothing else is missing." Wolfe looked at the battery panel. Where is the activating key? Murphy examined the pressure switch. The cap triggers it. Not originally. There is a second contact. He pointed to two narrow metal strips beside the timer wheel. Between them was an empty slot about an inch wide. Something flat had been inserted there to complete the circuit. Murphy tested it. He is right. Without a bridge across these contacts, the timer would not start. Kramer asked, "What kind of bridge?" "Any conductive strip," Wolfe said. "A photographic plate edged with copper, perhaps." The plate removed from the box behind the portrait had a copper strip along one side. I saw it then. Kettering had designed the machines as a connected system. The plate could be removed from behind the painting and inserted into the lampshade. Its repeated exposures preserved a record of the signals. Its copper edge completed the shade circuit. The person who activated the glowing lamp had possessed the plate. Kramer said, "But the plate was found inside the wall box." "Another plate was found," Wolfe corrected. Murphy checked the dimensions. The square plate from the wall was too large for the slot in the shade, but a narrow section could have been cut from an earlier plate. I remembered the torn envelope in the dark room, safe, and the clear rectangular mark on the basement workbench. Something small had been removed. Wolfe turned to me. The clock contained the projection mechanism. The metal box contained a photographic plate. The lampshade required a conductive key. Each apparatus produced evidence of its own use. "And someone removed the key," I said. "Someone who understood the machinery." Kramer stood. "Simon Vale. Possibly." He watched the signal, copied the records, and knew the rear passage. "Yes," he confronted Kettering. "Yes. He had motive to take the key." "Yes." Kramer waited. Wolfe drank beer. "That is all. It is enough for suspicion, not for demonstration." Kramer began pacing. The poison was in the coffee. Simon carried it into the library. Kettering drank it. Simon entered the dark room later. "The man with the cane may not even exist." "He exists," Wolfe said. "How do you know?" "Because Simon Vale has lied repeatedly to conceal himself, but he did not invent the one detail that weakens the case against him. The man with the cane could be a decoy. Then it is a poor one. A fictional stranger would be described clearly enough to pursue. Vale described gloves, a hat, a cane, and no face. Those are the impressions of a man seen briefly in weak light," I said. "The watchman also saw him." Kramer frowned. "At a distance. Still twice as often as we saw him." Wolfe rang for Fritz. "Archie arranged the gathering for 9 this evening." Kramer stopped pacing. "Gathering: Mr. Harold Kettering, Miss Ruth Calder, Mr. Simon Vale, Miss Celia Kettering, Mrs. Lorne, the watchman Hurst, Mr. Sykes, and Miss Rowan Bell. Rowan left the house yesterday. Find her. She has an apartment on Riverside Drive. Then New York has not swallowed her." Kramer looked at Wolfe with suspicion renewed. "You know who killed Kettering. I know what the lamp was designed to conceal." "That is not what I asked. It is what I answered." By 8:55, the office was crowded. Celia sat beside Ruth. Harold occupied the red chair. Simon Vale stood near the globe, refusing the seat offered to him. Mrs. Lorne wore black silk and disapproval. Hurst held his uniform cap in both hands. Sykes stood near the door beside Stebbins. Rowan Bell arrived last, pale from the rain and annoyed at being escorted by a detective. Kramer took the yellow chair and glared at the lamp, which I had placed on a small table near Wolfe's desk. The green shade was glowing. The bulb beneath it was cold. Wolfe entered, sat, and surveyed the room. "This lamp," he began, "has lied to every person present. It persuaded you that Amos Kettering was in his library. It persuaded you that electricity flowed through its bulb. It persuaded you that the hour of its illumination mattered." He looked from Harold to Ruth to Simon. "It did not mark the time of death. It marked the beginning of a trap." Simon Vale's face tightened. Rowan Bell said, "A trap for whom?" Wolfe placed the narrow battery panel on his desk. "For the person who knew that the lamp was not a lamp." He shifted his gaze to the rear of the room. "The person with the silver-handled cane." Every head turned. Sykes stood beside the door, straight and motionless, his hands resting at his sides. For the first time since Amos Kettering's body had been discovered, the butler's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Chapter 8. The final illumination. Sykes stood beside the office door, straight and motionless, while every face in the room turned toward him. For 3 seconds he allowed the suspicion to settle. Then he reached behind the umbrella stand and lifted a silver-handled cane. "This belonged to Mr. Kettering," he said. Inspector Kramer rose from the yellow chair. "You told us Kettering did not use a cane. He did not require one for walking. He carried this occasionally when leaving by the rear passage. He considered it an effective disguise." Sykes crossed the room and placed the cane on Wolfe's desk. It was ebony, polished black, with a heavy silver knob engraved with the initials A.K. Simon Vale stared at it. That was the first mistake he made in Wolfe's office. That evening it lasted only an instant, but I was watching him. And so was Wolfe. Simon did not merely recognize the cane, he recognized its appearance at that moment as a danger. Wolfe inspected the handle without touching it. "Mr. Sykes," he said, "when did you last see this object?" "Yesterday afternoon. It stood in the library umbrella rack." "Where was it this morning?" "In the rear passage, behind a heating pipe." "Why did you remove it?" "I did not. Sergeant Stebbins found it during the second search." Stebbins nodded. It had been wiped clean. Kramer's eyes went to Simon. "You said the man in the passage carried a cane with a silver handle." Simon's reply was controlled. "So he did." "You did not tell us it belonged to Kettering." "I did not know that." Sykes looked at him. "You saw Mr. Kettering carry it frequently." Simon's jaw tightened. "I saw many canes in that house." Wolfe leaned back. "You described a man whose face you could not see, wearing gloves and a hat, and carrying this cane. The watchman saw a similarly dressed figure cross the road. The description was useful because it introduced a stranger while borrowing an object associated with the victim." Kramer said, "You think Vale carried it himself?" "I do." Simon gave a short, dry laugh. "Then I followed myself into the alley." "The watchman saw 2 men, Kramer said. "He saw Vale and another man," Wolfe replied. "But the other man was not the figure Mr. Vale later described in the passage." Simon's eyes sharpened. Wolfe continued, "Mr. Hurst, repeat precisely what you observed." The watchman shifted his cap between his hands. "Mr. Vale's sedan was across the street. Another man came from Park Avenue and walked toward the alley. Medium height, dark overcoat, gray hat. He carried a cane." "Did you see Mr. Vale leave the automobile?" "Yes, he followed him." "Could the first man have been Amos Kettering?" "I said he looked smaller." "You saw him across a wet street at night?" "Yes." "Did you see his face?" "I did not." "Then he could have been Kettering walking with his shoulders bent and using a cane." Hurst considered it. "Yes, sir, he could." Celia spoke from beside Ruth. "My father sometimes stooped when his head hurt." Wolfe inclined his head. Amos Kettering left his own house through the adjoining passage. He crossed to Park Avenue, approached from the east, and returned openly toward the alley carrying the cane. He wished the watchman to observe an unidentified visitor entering the rear passage. Kramer frowned. Why would Kettering stage a stranger? Because he knew someone was watching the signal. He intended to catch that person entering the safe room. Simon said, "You have already established that I entered. I admitted it. After the evidence made denial useless. I entered to copy records. You entered because you believed Kettering was occupied elsewhere. The green point informed you that the safe was open. But Kettering had altered the routine. He left the house, circled the block, and returned in disguise, so that a witness would see 2 men approach the alley. Then he confronted you in the dark room." Simon's voice remained steady. "That is substantially what I told you. It is not. You claimed a stranger waited in the passage. The stranger was Kettering." Kramer stepped nearer, and after the confrontation, Wolfe's fingers met over his middle. "Mr. Vale killed him." Ruth Calder closed her eyes. Harold looked at Simon with open astonishment. Celia did not move. Simon turned to Kramer. "On what evidence?" On the lamp, Wolfe said. Simon looked at him. Wolfe nodded to me. I switched off the office lights. The green shade on the small table continued to glow. Beneath it, the clear bulb remained dark and cold. The effect was convincing from across the room. It looked like an ordinary study lamp shedding a soft green light. But the surface of Wolfe's desk remained dim. The papers before him could not be read by it. I switched the office lights on again. Wolfe said. The hidden battery panel was activated between 9:40 and 10 o'clock. It continued to illuminate the shade after the ordinary circuit was disconnected. Anyone unfamiliar with its construction would assume the bulb produced the light. Kramer said Kettering could have activated it. He did. He expected to confront the person exploiting his signal. The glowing shade was part of his trap. It would establish that the machinery had been set in motion before the intruder arrived. Simon lifted his chin. Then the lamp proves Kettering planned to meet me. It does not prove murder. Your conduct proves murder. That is not evidence. Your knowledge is. Wolfe turned toward Ruth. Miss Calder, you lied when you said Kettering never used the lamp because you wished to conceal your argument with him. You had entered the library at 9:30 to demand that he withdraw his accusation of embezzlement. Ruth's hands tightened in her lap. Yes, he threatened you, he said. The missing money would be traced to an account in my name. I told him Simon had arranged the papers, though I did not then understand what they were. Did you touch the lamp? I did not. Did you know the shade contained batteries? I did not. Wolfe looked at Harold. You lied about your movements because you had also argued with your uncle. He intended to reduce your inheritance and expose your debts to your fiancé's family. Harold's mouth twisted. Yes. You returned downstairs near 11:30, but did not enter the library. I heard voices and left. Whose voices? My uncle's and Simon's. Simon turned sharply. You never said that. I was protecting myself. You were protecting your inheritance. Harold met his stare. At least I was not protecting a murderer. Kramer raised a hand before the quarrel could become useful to anyone, except me. Wolfe continued. Miss Calder's lie concealed an argument. Harold Kettering's lie concealed another argument, and an unauthorized excursion. Neither knew how the lamp functioned. Both treated the green glow as an ordinary light. His eyes moved to Simon. You alone understood its true purpose. Simon's face had grown pale, but his voice remained calm. I knew about the signal beam. You knew more. You had entered the adjoining house repeatedly. You had observed the green point. You had copied records from the safe. You understood the concealed circuits well enough to exploit them. That still does not prove I knew about the panel inside the shade. Wolfe looked at Murphy, who stood near the bookshelves. The electrician opened his tool case and removed a narrow strip of copper, edged photographic material, sealed in a transparent evidence envelope. Kramer stared at it. Where did you find that? Inside Mr. Vale's automobile, Murphy said. Behind the rear seat panel. Simon's composure broke, only for a fraction of a second. But this time the break was complete. The strip fitted the empty contact slot inside the battery panel. Wolfe's voice was quiet. After killing Kettering, you removed the activating key because it bore your fingerprint and a trace of aconitine from the coffee cup. You hid it in your automobile, intending to destroy it later, but you left the panel running because its continued glow served your purpose. Simon said nothing. Kramer took the evidence envelope and inspected it. The laboratory found poison on this. Aconitine, Wolfe said. Also coffee residue, and one partial print matching Mr. Vale's right thumb. Simon remained silent. Wolfe spoke for him. The sequence is plain. Mr. Kettering learned that you had been entering through the rear passage and copying records. He also discovered the transfer of $200,000 into an account connected with Miss Calder. He arranged a trap. He opened the private safe, activated the silent green signal, set the lamp's battery panel, and left the library machinery performing its lies. The room was still except for the faint ticking of the office clock. He disguised himself with the overcoat, hat, and cane, circled the block, and allowed the watchman to observe him returning toward the alley. You saw the signal from your automobile and followed him inside. In the dark room, he confronted you with the original financial records and threatened to expose you. Simon's lips moved. He was a thief, possibly, Wolfe said. His dishonesty does not excuse your murder. He would have ruined Ruth. Ruth looked at him. Do not use me. Simon turned toward her. He had prepared evidence against you. You had prepared it for him when you put the money in my name. I intended to restore it. You intended to own me. That struck harder than Kramer's accusation, Wolfe continued before Simon could answer. The poison had been placed in the coffee before it entered the library. Miss Calder carried the tray only as far as the passage. You took it from her. Kettering did not normally drink coffee at night, but during the confrontation you told him it had been prepared at his request. He drank enough to receive a fatal dose. Simon shook his head. He drank it before I entered. The medical evidence contradicts you. The poison acted rapidly, yet Harold heard the two of you arguing near 11:30, and the watchman observed the return through the alley after that. Kettering was functional until you joined him, Kramer said. You put the aconitine in the cup while Ruth carried the tray. Wolfe corrected him. Mr. Vale had prepared the cup earlier. The poison was applied as a soluble coating inside the rim. The cook poured harmless coffee into it. Miss Calder carried it. Mr. Vale ensured that the marked cup reached Kettering. Murphy handed Kramer another evidence envelope containing a small porcelain fragment, Wolfe said. The laboratory found traces of wax beneath the glaze near the rim. It held the poison until hot coffee dissolved it. Simon's face had become grey, Wolfe went on. Kettering recognized his symptoms. He understood that he had been poisoned, but instead of calling for aid, he tried to complete his trap. He returned to the library and dictated or wrote the 3 letters. He intended them to force each of you to remain available in the morning. The letters were written after he died, Simon said. That was his final mistake. Kramer's head snapped toward him. No one had said. Kettering died before the letters were written. Wolfe regarded Simon with cold satisfaction. You knew the handwriting was produced after his death because you produced it. Simon stared at him. You placed Kettering at the desk after the poison overcame him. You copied the short sentences from drafts Ruth had typed earlier. The slow-drying ink concealed the difference in time. Then you activated the projected shadow and arranged the broken coffee cup beside the body. Kramer said. And the bruise. Mr. Kettering struck the desk when he collapsed. Mr. Vale moved him afterward, but could not remove the mark. Wolfe pointed toward the lamp. Finally, you expected the cold bulb to create confusion. If questioned, you could suggest that someone had replaced a hot bulb after the murder. That explanation would direct attention toward servants, policemen, and anyone entering the room in the morning. Simon's voice had become almost a whisper. You cannot prove I activated the panel. The copper key proves you handled it. The poison proves you handled it while preparing the cup. The watchman places you outside. Harold heard your voice inside. The financial records give motive. Your own statement placed you alone with the dying man. Wolfe's gaze hardened. And only you understood that the apparent light came from the shade itself. Ruth called the lamp unused. Harold called it glowing. You alone insisted that Kettering always kept it on, because you needed the police to accept its illumination as ordinary. Simon looked toward the door. Stebbins was already standing in front of it. For a moment, Simon seemed to calculate distance, weight, and probability. Then his shoulders lowered. I did not intend to kill him that night, he said. Kramer approached. You brought poison. I intended to frighten him, to make him ill enough to delay the bank meeting. With aconitine. I misjudged the dose. Wolfe made a sound of disgust. A murderer's oldest complaint. The victim proved inconveniently mortal. Simon looked at Ruth. I did it for us. There was never an us, she said. Kramer took Simon by the arm. Stebbins moved to the other side. Before they reached the door, Simon turned toward Wolfe. Kettering was guilty of more than I ever did. Then you should have exposed him, Wolfe said. You preferred to replace judgment with poison. Kramer removed Simon Vale from the office. The others departed gradually. Harold left without speaking to Celia. Ruth remained for a minute, beside the bookshelves, looking at the place Simon had occupied, then thanked Wolfe in a voice that contained no gratitude and went out alone. Mrs. Lorne retrieved the silver-handled cane, which she claimed belonged to her late husband before Kettering appropriated it. Sykes did not challenge her. When the office was empty, except for Wolfe, Fritz, and me, I turned off the battery panel. The green shade faded. That ties the clock, the shadow machine, the photographic plate, the signal, the safe, and the coffee together, I said. You might even call it satisfactory. I might not. Why? Kettering constructed an elaborate apparatus to deceive everyone around him. Vale learned to use it for theft and murder. Ruth lied from fear. Harold lied from greed. Sykes concealed family secrets out of habit. Satisfaction is not the word. Fritz entered to ask whether Wolfe preferred the brook trout at 7:30 or 8. Wolfe considered the matter with more concentration than Simon's confession had received, and chose 7:35. I looked at the dismantled lamp on the table. Its bulb had never warmed. Its shade had shone through the night. Its beam had crossed a wall, called a thief from the street, and helped a murderer build an alibi out of light. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and regarded it. The brightest deception in the room, he said, never produced enough light to read a single word. Then he picked up the seed catalogue, and the case of the lamp that never burned was closed.